Hey guys, and welcome to the Business Studies online videos. Now, normally we do this in a big lecture hall full of all of you students ready to sit your HSC, but unfortunately due to timetabling and scheduling issues, we can't make it with you today. But that didn't stop us from making these online videos just to make sure you guys are prepped and ready to go for your HSC. So I'm your Business Studies lecturer. If you've been to one of my lectures before, you probably know who I am. If not, and this is your first time tuning into one of these, then welcome. I'm sure it's probably not going to be the last one of these online lectures, but enjoy. And if you have any other feedback after the videos, please let us know so that when we make the new videos, we'll be able to meet whatever new ideas and requirements you guys can think of. So who am I? So for those of you who don't know, my name's Andrew. I studied the HSC in 2014. 3 years ago yesterday, I graduated, as scary as that may sound. In high school, my ATAR was 98.5, went to John Edmondson High School, and that's a small little, well, not even small, 1,000 students down at southwest Sydney, near Liverpool, Campbelltown, kind of in the middle of both. I studied HSC and got a 96 in business studies, and I'm currently studying law and commerce at the University of New South Wales. Now, for those of you that, again, don't know, I have had a little bit of experience here and there. So my family have operated a business now for 27 years. I've worked in retail a number of times. I used to work in sales in perfume. Now I work for sales at Optus. I also run my own web development business and run and manufacture websites for companies, as well as do like service setup and all that kind of IT kind of stuff. So a bit of a broad range. I'll bring some of those work-life experiences into my lectures and into the experiences for our case studies, that kind of thing, just to give you a bit of an idea of how to integrate it all in. I think let's start off with operations. So we're going to make a couple of videos here today and we'll segment them into the topics. But let's start off with operations. We'll go through the 4 topics and then the last video will probably more be about like skills and how to operate. So let's punch through. Now, what is operations? Operations is the idea of transforming an input into an output. So it's the production. It's all about getting that competitive advantage in your company and in your marketplace. Now, a lot of kids struggle, and it's very, very simple. We just need to remember, whenever an exam paper in business studies asks you what is the strategic role, pretty much all they're asking is, what's the long-term goals here? No, we're not talking short-term. We're not talking within the first 12 months. We're thinking more long-term. We're talking years and years. So again, how long in the long term, what is your role? What are you going to be doing with your operations? That is, do you expect to improve productivity over the next 5 years? Do you expect to release 20 new products in the next 5 years? What's that long-term role of operations? Now, operations obviously has a lot of things involved, like product, layout, location. We've got to manage all of these different things. And in doing all of that, we have to manage productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness. And we'll run through what those actually mean. Alrighty, so what is the role of operations? Now, in the syllabus, we have 2 different roles that we see. We can either differentiate or we can be a cost leader. Now, they're 2 totally different on opposite ends of the scale strategies or role operations. So when we product differentiate, it means that we improve or alter the product to make it not like any other competitor's product in the market. That is, it's much better quality, we deliver it faster, we do something really customized, we have more features. Like, think of how in some ways the new iPhone 10 is very much product differentiated against the other products in the market, like Samsung, for example. And again, despite that higher price tag cost, we still will justify it because that differentiated item or that differentiated feature is totally worth it. And it's kind of funny because I see here we say, oh, I'll pay over $1,500. Here we go, the new iPhone 10 just came out and it's $1,800. And I'm about to go and buy it next week. So you can imagine and see how product differentiation totally does work because it makes you justify paying extra in order to have those better features. In terms of cost leadership, we're then on the other end of the spectrum. We're looking at being that lowest cost manufacturer possible. That is, how can we squeeze those economies of scale, that is, produce as much as we can in bulk, in order to get high volume of sales and be the lowest cost manufacturer in the market. It's kind of the idea of like the reject shop, where they don't charge or they have a small profit margin, but they sell so much of it that it kind of makes up for it. So that's the two parallel different strategies. Now, which one businesses use depends on the product, depends on the market, depends on the competitors in the industry. Sorry, what people do say though in the industry is that differentiation is the way to go because it gives you that more long-term strategic benefit, because cost leadership is hard to not only get but to maintain, because people and competitors are always changing their ideas, it's always changing. So differentiation is definitely seen as more of a long-term, innovative idea of running a business, much better. Now, you probably already know this, don't need to go through it too much, but goods and services, obviously they're different. One's tangible, means you can physically touch it, the other's intangible, you can't. Here you can see the slides pretty much tell you exactly what you need to know. The important part though is that whilst they are different in some respects, they're the same in the fact that they both need technology to be produced or used. They need to satisfy a customer need, and we still need to make decisions on how much we produce, or capacity, location, how and where we produce it, as well as the physical layout of how we manufacture. So one example of that, of a company or a business that provides both goods and services, might be something like Qantas. See, they provide both goods, that is maybe like the food or the movie or whatever it might be, but they also provide services on their flight, that is actually the transportation and all that kind of stuff. So don't just feel like one business can only provide good and one business can only provide a service. It's not like that at all. Most businesses, in fact, will offer both at the same time in the same product. So just keep that in mind. So that's role done. Now let's move to influences. So there's a couple of things that can influence how we operate our business. The first is globalization. That's the idea that the world's getting smaller because of technology. The globalization in business is huge. It's changing the marketplace. Now we have businesses in China competing with businesses in Australia, competing with businesses in Zimbabwe. So thanks to the internet and global communication, global business and trade is much more improved. Now, what does that mean? So, for example, let's take Apple as an example here. They might design and prototype all of their products in America and California, but where is all the production done? It's all done at Foxconn, which is overseas. So you're looking at China and Asian companies. Now, why? Because it's cheaper. That's because they can operate global business, they can export and import products, and it makes business not only more effective but also a lot cheaper. So it's changed the marketplace completely. What it does mean though is that Apple and all these other companies, we're having to deal with more currencies, we have to deal with trade agreements and laws. We also have this idea of a global consumer. That is that me here in Australia, I can go and buy anything really that I wanted to in the entire world, even if it's in America, and I can purchase it. So then again, not only are these little Australian businesses competing for my business, but the global economy is competing for my business. It's completely changed the idea. The best example there again, eBay. Think about that. Next, technology. Now, technology has changed the game again. Similarly, we've got robotics, CAD, and CAM. So robotics, obviously we know what that is. It's using robots on the production line in order to increase efficiencies. CAD is computer-aided design, and CAM is computer-aided manufacture. Now, those two are a little bit different. The design aspect is more about using computers to design new products and prototype those new products electronically, whereas CAM is computer-aided manufacture. Manufacture is the side of production. So CAM is more focused on the actual production, having efficient production lines, assembly lines, that kind of thing. Whereas the CAD is more about the designing and the electronic programs that you can use to design the products. So next is quality expectations. Now, a lot of people have this idea where you need to match quality and price. That is, that if you have a really high-priced item, people naturally expect it to have a lot better quality. And if you have a really high-priced item and it's not matched by that quality, well, then there's going to be a lot of outrage by your customer base. So you kind of need to match it. You need to get that right balance where you're offering really high quality for a really good price. Then again, you've got to remember that customers may not want to pay such a high price, even if it's the most quality product they could buy. Sometimes it's out of their price range. So let's say, for example, like let's say they released a new iPhone worth $10,000 and it can do every little thing. It's unlikely that it's going to hit the major production markets because people just won't see the value in purchasing that high of a quality item when they could buy 10 of the other items and it would last them 10 times as long. So it doesn't really make sense. So you've got to really match that quality and price together. You've also got to work on reliability and durability. So durability is like its robustness, its ability to just continue to work, and it's toughness really. Whereas reliability is more so about how the product can continue to be used and without any hiccups or without needing any services. So cars are a good example here. A lot of people associate the brand Toyota with really good reliability and really good durability, so it gets both of those. Next is competition. So that is cost-based competition. Now, speaking back again, that cost leadership kind of style, competitors are always trying to cut your prices, so in operations we need to keep that in mind. The next set of influences is government policies. Now, this is more about fiscal policy and monetary policy here. That's like the government setting certain budgets, that kind of thing. And tariff and quota removal. So over time, for those of you kids that study economics as well, over time we've seen governments really reduce their tariff and quotas. Now, tariff and quotas are limits or costs or taxes that are charged against other countries trying to import their goods. So what happens is, for example, back in the day when there used to be tariffs and quotas on imported cars, a Hyundai car might get a couple of grand extra in tax. That meant that when Holden used to make their cars here, it used to make them a little bit more price competitive. That kind of helped our Australian industry more so. But over time, governments and economics proves that, tariffs and quotas don't really work. If your government or your economy is not good at producing cars because you're not the best cost leader, then why do it? You're better off moving. And that's what we've seen happen. We've seen our government get away from car production and funding that Holden and Ford in Australia. And instead, we're now moving to a more service-based economy because we have a higher education here in Australia and we speak really good English, we have a good understanding. So, it just makes sense. So we've seen that as a government policy being reduced over time. Now, in terms of the legal regulations, we're looking at the Workplace Health and Safety Act, Environmental Protection Act, Competition and Consumer Act, all of these different acts. Just remember their names obviously, and their purposes. So the Competition and Consumer Act sets out a lot of like rules and regulations on how businesses must operate with each other, as well as it sets a lot of quality expectations, warranties, all that kind of stuff. So just keep that one in mind. Next is the environment. Now, when we're operating, we need to keep an eye on our resource depletion, our pollution, and obviously how we dispose of it. And you've just got to remember that businesses really have to be careful with this because consumers are finding out more information thanks to the internet. So, an exposure of a company doing bad practices, overseas or here even in Australia of like dumping oil in rivers or that kind of thing, if that gets exposed online and on the media, the company's reputation is going to be dramatically reduced. And that's not what the company wants. So you've got to really play on that environmental aspect now in operations as well. Lastly is corporate social responsibility, and that is when we look at human rights, human resources, the two of those combining together, ensuring that we're not taking corruption or bribes, and ensuring like transparent and honest. And a lot of people have this argument or this conversation about what is the difference between ethics and law in business. Is just because you are following the law, is that ethical? Is that what people expect from your company? And if it's not, obviously that's a common occurrence, that the law doesn't necessarily match our consumer expectations. And if you are considered breaching those, then not only will you get consumer backlash, but if you're actually breaching the law, then there'll be financial and even criminal aspects as well if you're not careful. All right, let's now move to processes. So processes is quite simple. It's broken down into 3 steps. It's input, processes, output. That's the easiest way to remember it. Now, you've got in inputs, these are the things that go into the production process. Now, these can be 2 things, either transformed resources or transforming resources. Transformed resources are materials, information, and customers. Now, I used to remember as MIC, M-I-C. That is any material or information or customers that get pretty much churned through the business. These things change, so the thing that comes in is very much going to be different than the thing that goes out. So for example, steel, that is a material that might come in, is going to be completely different because it's going to be transformed into a car on its way out. That's the other thing, is that its added value leaves the business. So once it is transformed and in that production process, it then leaves the business and it's gone. Whereas transforming resources is more like human resources and facilities. These things stay within the business even after the production process is complete, but more importantly, they just add value to the company. So that, for example, here, your employees, even after making that same car, will stay within the business, will learn that skill, and will get better at it, and that's that human resources. The way I used to remember it is transforming used to suggest that it's continuously doing it. It's always changing and it's always doing its thing. And that's what transforming really is. Whereas transformed, ED, kind of senses past tense, which means it's done. So once it's produced, it's done, it's left the business, it's gone, and it's changed into something else. Easiest way to remember it. Now, next is processes. Now, this is the actual physical alteration, either transportation, the protection or inspection of the good. Now, there are 3 different ways you can do this processes step: job, batch, or flow. Job is more about where you do one job at a time. It allows you to do really high customization, which means every customer that walks in the door is a new job, and that job can be totally customized to whatever that customer wants. It does, however, mean there is low output, which means that because you're customizing so much and you're changing each output to fit the customer as best as possible, does mean that you're not getting or producing a lot at the same time. You have to be very focused. It does mean, though, that sometimes you get to charge a high price because you're really customizing it for the customer. Next is batch. That's when you do certain things in certain batches. So for example, if we were to take Baker's Delight, they might do all of their white bread products and bake those first. Then they'd clean all the equipment in the bowls. Then they do the next batch type, and then they clean all the equipment in the bowls. And then they're going to do the next batch type again, which might be, white bread to whole meal to whole grain, low fat, no fat, all that kind of thing. The same idea with milk. So yeah, that's when it's done in batches, and they produce enough then in each batch for efficiency. The last option is then flow. That is when it's just continuously bang on, next item. And it's where there's low customization, but there is high output. So it allows you to just continuously flow out products in the production process. Which one a company uses is honestly up to them. Again, it's the idea of what product, how big is the product, how expensive is the product to make, how often do they need to make it. So it really does depend on what the business is doing. Next is how is it influenced? Now there's 4 V's that you've got to remember: volume, variety, variation in demand, and visibility. So volume is how much do they need to produce? So for example, if we're taking an example of a company that makes high volume items, again, you might look at someone like bread where it's high volume. Whereas variety is more like, okay, well, how many varieties are there of the same product? So when you think about a car, for example, there might be 5 or 6 different car models. So let's say we take the Holden Commodore, for example. There might be, there's the SV6, there's the sports lines, the top of the range. There's all these different ranges of technically the same product, but there's a lot of variety within that product. So, how that changes depends on how your production changes, depends on the type of product again. Next is variation of demand. So that is that sometimes you need to produce a lot in a short period of time and then not much later on. So for example, high variation might be something like ice cream, where in summer we demand it, we need to produce it a lot more, whereas in winter it kind of dies down a lot more. Lastly is visibility. That is, how much can the customer see the actual production process themselves? A good example here was one day I was watching the Domino's CEO on like that Hidden Bosses, where the boss hides or masks himself as somebody else pretending to do work experience, and then goes into the company and just works with general employees to see where the business is doing well, where it's not doing so well. Now, management for Domino's decided, hey, look, let's move the production process to the front of the store behind a glass panel so that the customers know we're producing and manufacturing the pizzas really fresh. They can see the fresh ingredients. It will look good, right? Well, in theory, that might sound good. In practice, not so much. The reason why is in those rush hour periods, they would realize that, capsicum got mixed with pineapple and the front of the store looked terrible. It didn't look as clean as what they were expecting because they're in a rush. Customers then had questions about allergies. Were they mixing foods? It really, really ruined it. It also made the store look really disgusting during busy periods. So although the idea of having fresh products available to the front of the store might have been good in theory, in practice, the high visibility of customers being able to see that production process actually did more damage than good. And that's why they then cut that idea, moved production back to this end of the back of the store, and we haven't really seen of it since. But that's a real good case example there of how visibility and variation and volume and variety really work together, that domino story there. All right, next is scheduling and sequencing. So what happens here is we need to schedule and sequence certain tasks and certain events in order to get the production process as effective as possible. So for example, we'll do things like task analysis breakdown. More importantly, we'll do things like Gantt charts and critical path analysis. Now, Gantt charts is what you can see here on the screen. That is almost like an Excel spreadsheet, a bar graph that goes down and it shows you when a task is going to start and when the task is expected to finish. It also shows times when you can do the same 2 tasks at the same time in order to be more effective and efficient. However, critical path analysis is a little bit different. It's more of a line connecting dots. Now, a lot of kids get this confused. The easiest way to remember is that it's the longest path. How do you calculate this is the question. Now, it's the longest path because it's the amount that you need to do in order to get all tasks complete. So if you have a look at the picture in the short answer, the multiple choice question that you can see on your screen there, you'll notice that it's the longest path is the one in red, and that is because it is the critical path. Now, if I was to take the top path, I'd go A, B, E, C, and D, I wouldn't get to complete all the tasks needed. So it's not the critical path. The reason we use critical path analysis is not only to see what tasks come first and what comes next in what order, but we can know then that, if there's a production issue between B and E, then we will be able to realize and know that, look, as long as it's not more than, a couple of days, we'll be fine. We'll be able to still finish the production using the critical path, that is 18 days. Now, if we experience, troubles on the critical path itself, so let's say that the task of AB actually took maybe 10 days, so we add an extra 5 days. Now, because that's on the critical path, that's going to be a problem. It means our whole production is going to blow out. Whereas if a task not on the critical path blows out by a couple of days, depending on, then it might not affect it. You need to calculate this. So you need to calculate what the new critical path might be versus what the old one was in order to see which is the new critical path. Next is technology. Again, you know it. We need to incorporate things like leading edge technologies that are risky but expensive. We need to be flexible. We need to have that competitive edge. And technology leads us to have less waste as well. And as well as having better customer understanding of their needs. Next is task design. Now, task design is how are we going to break up the entire production process into certain steps. It's broken down in order to have that ongoing improvement. So we can then break down certain steps and see where we need to improve our production process. Next is product and processes layouts. Now, what's the difference? Processes layout is more about assigning the manufacturing floor according to their function. Whereas product is more about arranging it into stations that the product can then go through. So processes allows you to have more greater customization because you're able to move the same product to the painting department, to the fitting department, to the assembly department. You can arrange and move the product around. Whereas product is when it just goes across a normal assembly line. And it allows you to have a large volume of goods because it's just one after another, but it does mean low variation. So a good example here, a product line might be something like a car manufacturing where it's just an assembly line going through and it's arranged in stations. So, you've got the molding, the glass, the assembly, the painting, etc., etc. Whereas processes is more for customization and requiring specialized staff and tools. And last but not least, you need to really monitor and control these processes. That is, you need to look at your quality, your speed, dependability, all these factors, and you need to really continuously monitor every time. Now, monitor is just look at what's going on. Controlling is more about comparing your actual versus planned performance and seeing if they are equal. If not, do we need to make any corrective action and adjustments? And in order to do this, businesses use this idea of total quality management. That is, that we look at every single employee as being responsible for quality, and we make sure that everyone knows what our quality expectations are and how to fix them if they fall below that standard. It means that we have a higher quality product, less chances of customers being dissatisfied, less chances of customers bringing back products that are faulty. Lastly is outputs. That is the final good or service that is produced. Now, according to the syllabus, there are two main outputs aside from the product itself. That is the customer service, that's intangible, how we interact with the customer, as well as warranties. Now, warranties are when, faulty products, that kind of thing, where it falls below quality expectations and we need to warrant our products to ensure quality and fitness for purpose, and it's free from defects and faults. Now, in terms of warranties, that's all controlled by that Competition and Consumer Act, which sets those minimum level requirements by law of what companies can and can't do. And we've just got to remember that those two very much interplay with each other. So whilst the actual final good or service is really important, so too is that customer service and that warranty as well. All right, let's smash out these strategies now. So we've got these 5 performance objectives, which you really do need to remember. There's something that you can just jot down in your essays and that kind of thing as little headings, really, really important. So a strategy for a company in operations is to meet these 5 goals. Now, what we must remember, and what's really good to bring up in your essays and business reports, is that it's almost impossible to achieve all 5 goals at the same time. For example, if we want the highest quality product, it's going to cost too much, like we were saying earlier. So we need to make sure we balance out these 5 performance objectives according to what consumers expect, what our business can provide, what we can and can't do, pretty much just making sure that we're not only competitive in the market, but that we're meeting these objectives as much as possible where they are most important. Now, in terms of costs, there's obviously a couple of different ranges of costs. By this stage of the syllabus or this stage of the course, I'm hoping you should know those. So there's a quick little definitions there, just run through them if you're not too sure. The next strategy, other than the objectives, is to then now focus on producing a new good or service. That is, yes, a lengthy and an expensive process, but it helps you make a new product that really works, the best for your company. Now, one thing that companies must do is they must make sure that when they're making a new product, that it's commercially viable. That is, that there is, it's worthwhile for the company to make it. Are we wasting our time and money developing this new product if customers aren't going to buy it, if it's too expensive, if we can't produce it in time? So that's why we need to look at quality, cost, capability, technical advantage. Do we have the skills, the technology in order to produce this new good or service? Because if we're doing this entire good and service development process, get to the end and realize, hey, hold on, no one's going to buy this because it's too expensive, then what's the point? So you need to be really careful about that. Next step in operations or next strategy is supply chain management. That is, we need to look at manufacturing the good or service to deliver it as quick, as cheap, in the most dependable way possible. So we need to look for suppliers. Now, what is supply chain? That is the suppliers that put the inputs into your business. We need to find those that are reliable, that are cheap, that are high quality. A lot of businesses make the mistake of saying, we're going to take the cheapest supplier, but then they suffer on quality and reliability. For a lot of businesses, my parents included, they would rather pay that $1 or $2 extra per product so long as they know that they're going to get the highest quality product and that they're going to get a really reliable service. Because what's the point of getting the cheapest if when you need them, you can't get them and then you have to go and resort to the most expensive one anyway? So you're better off building those relationships with your suppliers who are reliable, who are cost effective, and who have high quality. Next strategy is also about reducing lead time. Now, lead time is the time difference between ordering the product, the input, and actually receiving it. Now, the shorter that lead time is, the better for the business because we can be more flexible and more profitable in our business adventures. It also, the supply chain itself is affected by how big your business is, the location of your business, how much you order in bulk, and then the availability of transport and the perishability of your product. Obviously, these all affect how you can move your product and how your inputs can be moved to you. There is a trend though in rationalization. That is that we reduce the number of suppliers as much as possible. So for example, whereas businesses maybe 5-10 years ago used to have 20-30 suppliers, we're now looking at reducing and rationalizing that as much as possible. That way we get better relationships with the companies we want to, we get better discounts and deals, and it usually means that we're less, it's easier to manage and maintain because we're dealing with less suppliers. Makes our lives a lot easier in business. And again, the last point is better to have long-term with less suppliers and having better bulk purchasing discounts because, it makes sense for the business in the long run. Next is logistics. That is transportation, inventory management, and planning and scheduling. Logistics is all about making sure there's that steady flow of inputs and outputs going in and out of the business, and it's all about getting the right item at the right time, at the right place, and at the right price. E-commerce is another operational strategy. That is using the internet to buy and sell goods and services. Think of eBay. The best example is any business you online shop at. Think about Maya. Think about Dick Smith when they were there. Think about JB Hi-Fi, Apple. They have retail as well as online stores that sell the exact same products. Why? Because it's convenient. It's a market trend. They need to comply with it. It's an operational strategy that they need to do. Next, again, global sourcing. Because of this globalization idea, we can get suppliers for the same product anywhere in the world. So a good example here is nails. So my parents produce pallets, which of those timber things that forklifts lifts products on. If you're not sure, just pause the video, go Google it. Anyway, the pallets themselves. Now we used to supply our nails here in Australia, super expensive. And the quality, whilst it was good, not as good for price value. Now with China really improving their quality and production processes, the same nail might cost half the price. We can also import it in a container for so much cheaper than it costs to go and pick it up from Australia here in Australia. So again, global sourcing, changing the market, being more competitive, and meaning for a business perspective, we can reduce our costs of goods to produce it. We can reduce those costs. Now, in terms of global sourcing as well, you can either just buy inputs from suppliers, like I was saying, buying it from a supplier, or you can actually vertically integrate with them, which means you can almost like merge companies together by buying out the supplier's facilities and you yourself be the supplier yourself. So pretty much, let's pretend you're a bakery and you're like, you know what, I might go buy a wheat farm and a grinding mill in order to turn that wheat into flour. That's the kind of vertically integration that we're talking about there. Last but not least, we're looking at outsourcing. Now, outsourcing is about contracting out those non-core business activities. So for example, there is no point for my parents to employ a full-time cleaner for the factory if it can be done maybe once every second or third day. Also, it's not a core business operation. Why do we need to worry about human resources, about laws and compliances, when we could outsource that to a whole nother company? And that's the same. A lot of companies do that with IT, with cleaning, even marketing. Some companies outsource their marketing and operation strategies. Now, there is obviously benefits. Sometimes it's cheaper, it's easier, you can focus more on your core business strategies and ideas. The disadvantage though is that then they're working for their own company, which means at the end of the day, if they don't know what you want, how you want it, if they don't know your business culture, they're not going to really fit in well. So a good example here is, let's say I outsourced all of my company's IT department. Now, if that IT outsourcer doesn't know my business, how I operate, my policies and procedures, they're not going to be effective. Mind you, if they're representing the business on the bottom line and on the front line, and they're showing customers what our business is and they're representing my business, you're going to want to make sure that they're bloody good at their job, because otherwise you're going to really get bad reputation, bad customer service experiences. It's not good. A good thing to think about here is think about when companies outsource call centers overseas. Now, I mean, I work for Optus. I deal with it every day. A lot of customers really don't like the idea that we outsource our, services overseas for call centers. Now, as frustrating as it might be for some customers, outsourcing is cheaper and it's effective because more customers can speak to more people at the same time. So whilst it might be frustrating for some, on a business economic sense, it makes sense, right? So you've got to weigh up those advantages and disadvantages and maximize those advantages as much as possible. Next is technology. Again, we've got to use either leading edge or established technologies in order to really bump up that operations processes and strategies. Leading edge technologies are those innovative and new riskier technologies, but they do give you a competitive advantage. So yes, whilst they are expensive at first, they do give you that real good competitive advantage in the market. So you just got to make sure that you're investing your leading edge technologies in the right technologies. Next is established technologies. That is those tried and tested, proven technologies. So a good example here is think about Jetstar or Qantas. Back in the day, those self-serve kiosks where you can check yourselves into flights, they were really innovative, leading edge. They were considered really good competitive advantage. Nowadays, they've turned into more of an established technology. We almost expect it now. Same with PayPass, FPOS, that kind of thing. We almost expect it. So whereas once it was, oh my God, a brand new feature, it would have cost Qantas and Jetstar a lot to develop that technology. Now it's almost commonplace. It's a lot cheaper to now implement into the business. And last but not least, looking at inventory management. That is making sure we've got the right stock available at the right time. We need to prevent dead stock, stock outs, as well as minimizing theft and damage as much as possible. How do we do this? We look at holding stock, which is having enough buffer amount there to make sure that we can cover those interruptions. We also need to look at LIFO and FIFO and just in time. Now, LIFO is the last product that came in is the first one that comes out. So for example, if you're stacking your products like this in order and the newest product is on this end of the scale, then obviously the last item that came in goes out. So this item goes out, then this item goes out, then this item goes out. Now the one that's been sitting here for ages stays there usually for ages because it really hardly ever gets touched. It's good for bulky items that are hard to move, as well as for items that aren't perishable. It's not like they're going to expire. So like furniture, for example, is a good example here, where they'll just put the newest stock in that order. FIFO is the complete opposite. It's where even though you stack the products like this, you take the oldest product first. That way you're not left, with old items that are perished. So for example, think about bananas. You obviously want to make sure that the freshest bananas are there, but you want to make sure that the oldest bananas are sold first. So that's why when companies fill up their supplies, they'll put the freshest stuff at the bottom so that customers naturally pick this stuff off at the top, and then all of a sudden that older stock then rises. Another good example is think about like KFC. When you get those when you go open up a fridge door and you get that drink out, and the drink that comes out first, and then the others slide in front in its place, in a vending machine even. That's because the oldest stock comes out first. That way, those perishable items, the expiry dates, they're not wasting there in the fridge or in the pantry or whatever it might be. Next is the idea of just in time. That is holding as minimal stock as possible in order to reduce the costs and efficiency. And that way, we've got to be careful though, because it is risky. We've got to be careful that the product is not coming in and then not making it in time for production. So whilst we need to minimize stock as much as possible, we need to have really good reliable suppliers. We need to have really good efficiency and procedures, because if we're trying to use just in time to save money, by getting supplies in maybe the day before a product is going to be made, what happens if that supplier falls out and doesn't deliver on time? It means production for everything slows down, and here we need to worry about critical path analysis and all the rest of it. So we really need to be careful. Last but not least, we really need to look at quality. Have a look here through these slides. It's quite simple. We obviously want to be aiming for total quality management, which is a combination of all of these three boxes. And again, minimum quality standards are set in that Competition and Consumer Act. We also need to overcome that resistance to change. That is, Companies really need to make sure that operational procedures are changing as much as possible and that employees are helping with that change. We want to make sure that companies aren't having that idea of inertia, which is where employees just are resisting change as much as possible. They don't like it. How do we fix that? We keep them informed. We keep the customers and the employees valued. And we need to let them know through retraining and through introducing new technology and reorganizing roles that they are valued employees and that times do need to change. Now we're looking at global factors. Now, again, we've kind of covered this, and that's what I love about the business studies course, is it's so repetitive that it's almost all interlinking for you. Again, we look at global sourcing, which we've already discussed. We look at economies of scale, where we buy in bulk. Again, already discussed. We look at scanning and learning. That's where we look at global competitors and see what they're doing and almost do like a copycat. See where their production processes are really good, see where it's not so good for them and not so good for you. How can you improve that? And last but not least is innovate by using research and development. Yes, it's costly. Yes, it's expensive, but at the end of the day, totally, totally worth it. That's it. That's operations done. Thanks for tuning into part 1. Next, we're going to go through the other 3 topics plus some skills later on. So I hope that was helpful for you for operations. The main ideas here in operations is just make sure that you're linking the ideas and strategies as much as possible. So link those influences to those strategies in order to get those high band 6 marks in your essays and your reports. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next part.